Hello, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting, with God at the center, where he belongs, and real-world, first-hand experience. Tried a new format recently, putting the bio at the end, but I didn't really get any feedback one way or the other, so I'll put it back in the beginning. Before I start the bio, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review. If you like this podcast, you want more, your one-stop shop for more is goodshepherdtraining.com. Goodshepherdtraining.com. Today's episode is going to be a fun one on truck guns. First part of the episode is going to kind of be nostalgia and traveling guns of days of yore. And at about the 16-minute mark, we're going to get into modern truck guns. If that's all you want, you can skip ahead to that. And if you want to skip the bio, skip around 3 minutes, 45 seconds from where it starts. With that, we'll roll into the bio and then the episode. Hope you enjoy. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, he got me through some nasty places in this world, war zones, and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents he's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals, and I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, called by God to share the good news, preacher, a fisher of men. With that, we will roll into the day's topic. And that topic, I think, is going to be a fun one today. And that's going to be truck guns. Now, truck guns is kind of a common term if you're in the gun world, the gun culture. But I mean, it could be the trunk of a Honda Civic, or really the front of a quad, whatever that is. But truck guns, guns that you carry on you to be ready, they give you a little bit more firepower than you normally would have. And let's say your EDC handgun. So let's just assume that all of us men stand ready, a well-regulated militia, and we carry a handgun day to day, CCW. Let's assume that from the start. And let's move on to the truck gun. Something that's going to give us a better rate of fire, more firepower, the ability to stop whatever common threats we may encounter quickly and efficiently. Now, I was thinking about this, and I think we'll start off with kind of the origin, the old school, what you would think about as the old school truck guns. And I think the original truck gun kind of predates trucks, kind of predates the automobile. I think kind of the quintessential classic truck gun is the American lever action carbine, let's say a Winchester 94, or the old school Marlin equivalent. You know, you think about the dusty old cowboy on a cattle drive, or after the cattle drives were over, you know, riding the fences, keeping the cows in. He likely had a pistol on him. And then, you know, in the scabbard on his horse, he likely had a lever action rifle, Winchester 94 or the like. And the other real common one, we even still call them coach guns, the double action, you know, shorter barrel side by side shotguns. You think about, you know, the old Wells Fargo bank coaches. You know, they're called a coach gun because they were on a stagecoach. That's what they were used for, warding off bandits and robbers and nefarious people. And I'd say they've really kind of stood the test of time. You know, a Winchester 94 behind the front seat of an old pickup truck with a bench seat would be a fine choice. You know, having one of those old lever actions to pull out to dispatch a coyote or put down an injured cow or any number of things. You know, that's still not an uncommon thing out west out here. I would argue that the shotgun's a little bit antiquated. I do have my grandfather's old side-by-side. While it's a fine gun to hunt with, and it's a fine piece of machinery, it doesn't really give you that reasonable rate of fire that you might want, and they're far generally more expensive than a pump shotgun, and a lot of times more than a semi-auto. So I'd argue that those are a little bit antiquated, but still, you know, much more firepower than a handgun. You know, a big old double-barrel side-by-side with double-aught buck is still a formidable weapon. It was a formidable weapon 150 years ago, and it's a formidable weapon now. But, you know, a lever action 30-30 or 45-70 or something like that is a reasonable rate of fire, an effective cartridge. It's light, it's handy. And again, a big step up in firepower and the ability to engage multiple targets at different ranges at greater distances than you're probably going to get with your handgun. So I'd say that's kind of the genesis, unless we go way back to the old, like, blunderbuss. But as far as modern, you know, traveling guns go, modern truck guns, I would say that's kind of the genesis and the origin. And again, they're still not a bad choice. Now, if you bump it up a couple of decades, looking in the let's call it the 1950s to the 1980s, you know, what were you likely to find? You know, when I was growing up, it still was pretty common to have a gun rack in the back of somebody's truck. That was still, you know, a common thing. And in those decades, what you were likely to find back there was a pump or semi-auto shotgun and some kind of rifle. Usually a bolt-action rifle. A lot of times in that era, it was one of the old military conversions, whether it was a Mauser or an Enfield. Or kind of the quintessential one for me growing up was the SKS, which is still a fine weapon and would still be a fine truck gun. But those kind of three, you know, starting in, well, even before, but I would say in the 1950s and on to the 1980s, a pump shotgun was kind of something every country boy and most American men were familiar with. And probably, if they had a truck gun, it was likely in their arsenal. a 20 gauge, a 16 gauge, which is kind of fallen by the wayside, or still the most common today, a 12 gauge. An old Ford or Chevy truck rolling down a dirt road with a pump action shotgun in the back kind of just brings up images of nostalgia and metal Coca-Cola signs and Norman Rockwell paintings. And again, I'd say that stood the test of time. That is one of my go-to truck guns. Mine's a semi-auto, but a good, repeatable shotgun. Let's move on to probably the next most common one you see would be a bolt-action rifle. Likely in 30-06, by the 50s and 60s, 308 was becoming very common. 243. So a bolt-action rifle and one of those quintessential, I forgot 270, how could I forget that? One of the quintessential iconic American rounds in a bolt-action rifle, maybe iron sights, maybe a fixed 4-weaver or some kind of scope on it, but a good centerfire bolt-action rifle. Those were pretty common truck guns. In fact, in my professional hunting and guiding days, the most common thing a guide would have would be a 243 bolt-action of some kind. But like we talked about, an old military conversion 30-06, or an American-made, 700 Winchester Model 70, something like that. And then getting up into the 80s. Now, yes, I know that Armalite came out with the Ar-15 in the 1950s. I realize that. I know that it was started out as a civilian gun and adopted by the military. I understand that. But I don't think you were going to commonly come across an AR-15 in the back of somebody's truck. I don't remember ever seeing that growing up. And I'm not saying that nobody did it, but I'm saying it wasn't a common truck gun. Really, the most common truck gun I remember in that guise, again, is the SKS. Growing up, you could get those for, $79, $100 all day long. The SKS, they were durable, they were reliable, and they were cheap. That was probably the most common rifle for hunting I remember growing up. Lots of people had them because, again, they were cheap, they were reliable, and they worked. And they were $79. If you threw it in the bottom of a canoe or threw it in the back of your truck, you weren't worried about beating it up. It was a working man's gun. And I would argue it's still a fantastic choice for a truck gun. It's got a good intermediate caliber. It's good for medium to large game. It's good for defense. It was designed as a defensive rifle. I would argue, especially in states where you can't have a detachable magazine or a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds, it's still probably on the top of the list. So the SKS was likely one of the first common semi-autos you would find as a truck gun. And I remember growing up, and I was a kid born in the early 80s, like the cool Gucci tactical, before tactical was really a word, like the cool guy soldier of fortune gun that you aspired to have as a truck gun in the back of your truck was a Mini 14. The Mini 14 ranch rifle. I know that today the AR really has become, America's rifle. And it's, from what I hear all the time, the most common rifle in America. But you don't have to go back very far, and that wasn't the case. Yeah, the ARs have been around since the 50s, but they weren't super common on the civilian side for a long time. You got to remember the assault weapons ban. That hasn't been sunsetted that long, but when I was growing up, nationwide, there was a ban on high-capacity magazines, a ban on, most modern ARs, and there was only one or two companies that made them. There was Colt, and there was Bushmaster. For a long time, there may have been a few oddball ones like Olympic Arms. There was nowhere near what there is today on the AR market. If you get an assault weapons ban or pre-ban AR with no flash hider and a 10-round mag, or any of the other ridiculous things that they made you do to them, at that point you got to argue, is it really an AR-15 anymore? But the Ruger ranch rifle was kind of like the working man's AR-15, the common man's tactical rifle. It was super prevalent in, the 80s and the 90s. The Ruger Mini 14 came out in the 70s. I think by the 80s it was kind of in full swing. And I'm a big fan of the Mini 14. I really like them. I use them as a police officer. I think in a lot of ways they're better than an AR-15. I know, crazy. But I've trained with both. I've shot both. And to be fair, I don't own a Mini 14 or a Mini 30. I really like them, but I have so much training and experience in the military and in law enforcement with the AR. Even though I may like an AK or a Mini 14, the amount of training I have in an AR really sways me to just use and run those. Having decades and decades of experience running that pattern of rifle. So, again, I'd say that that's still a fine rifle and a fine choice. And there's all kinds of weird laws in states that try and restrict your right to keep and bear arms to infringe it. In a lot of those states, you can have a Mini 14 for whatever reason, but you can't have a regular AR. You have to have one of those, semi-neutered AR-15s. And at that point, you really got to look at it and judge which one is better. All right, so I guess we'll call that, the first half of this. Well, how did we get to where we are with truck guns in the past of truck guns? The truck guns of the days of yore. And we'll get into the modern talk of what are today some of your best options. What are your best options right now for truck guns? All right, so excluding the ones we already talked about, which would still be fine choices, right now, today, what's going to be your best option to up your firepower in the modern age? With modern threats, active shooters that are a real thing, radical Islamic terrorists that are a real thing, being able to quickly dispatch a coyote, any number of those things. Obviously situational dependent. The guy that drives a Honda Civic from the suburbs to his urban cubicle is going to probably have different needs than the rancher that's driving around his ranch checking fences and mending fences. But still, we'll cover some good all-around choices here. And I think, America's rifle, the AR-15, what it's become, and it's so customizable now that I think we got to talk about it as, the number one choice for a truck gun nowadays. And you can pick other things, but just like I argue with a shotgun, start there, and then if you have a reason, start with the shotgun for home defense. And if you can justify something else for you based on real-world criteria, then that's fine. But I would start there with the shotgun for home defense. I would start with the AR for the truck gun. On the back seat of my Hummer, my driver's seat, I carry a backpack. An Eberly stock. It's, I think, the Gun Runner. I forget the model, but it has a big scabbard in there where a long gun can go. Back behind my seat, in there, is an AR-15, quote-unquote pistol, with a pistol brace. And I kind of thought those were a gimmick for a long time. I was kind of against them, but I actually got one and ran it and shot it, and I think they're quite handy and quite practical. And it doesn't have to be an AR pistol, but they are kind of handy to keep behind, the seat of your car. But I would say an AR-15 today. I would say start there. And you may have a different choice, but I run one in the city, I run one in the country. I ran one. It was my secondary rifle, depending on mission, but when I was the commander of an active shooter response team, my primary rifle was a SCAR 17. And the second most common rifle that I would carry would be that AR quote-unquote pistol. It was light, it was handy, it was a vast increase in firepower over my handgun, the gun that I carried on my hip all the time. It's a great truck gun. It's aluminum and polymer and nitride coated, which is a very impervious, very robust coating. It has backup irons, and it has a pretty robust red dot sight, so even if the red dot broke, I have backup irons. And I've got to say, as a professional guide and rancher and professional gunfighter, I've beat the crap out of that gun. I just took it to a youth class with a bunch of kids, treating it like kids treat guns. And the thing's a rock-solid gun. It's dependable, it's accurate, it's reliable. So that's one of my, again, situational dependent, but one of my most common go-to truck guns. Again, it rides behind the seat of my Hummer, loaded with 55 grain Frontier boat tail hollow point match ammo. I use it in the country to take coyote. I use it in the city as an active shooter response tool. Now, you don't have to get an AR pistol, but I think consider the AR and whatever guys you want. If you just want a regular 16-inch M4 or M4 type rifle, you can get those super cheap now. We kind of live in the golden age of ARs. You could build one of those, and I haven't built one since pre-COVID times, but you could build one of those pre-COVID times for $400, $500. I'm talking a good, reliable, reasonably accurate, dependable rifle. You could build a fine one. You could buy a fine one. A Smith & Wesson M&P would be my first choice if you're buying one, or a Delton, or any number of those. In a pistol configuration and an M4 carbine configuration, I kind of have a soft spot for the 20-inch barrel ARs because I went to war twice with them. But just a good, dependable AR. They're so affordable. They're so within the reach of a common man nowadays. And they've been around and worked on so long, and they're so customizable, and there's so many companies making good parts for them. If you don't like the direct impingement system, you still have, doubts about its reliability. There's a lot of companies that make really good piston ARs, and I like piston ARs. One of my go-to, I only own 2 ARs. I'm not a gun collector. I'm a gunfighter. One of my go-to ARs is probably 15 years old at this point, and who knows how many rounds I've had through it, and it's a piston Adams Arms, and that thing is still a tack driver. It's ridiculously accurate. It would be ridiculously accurate for a bolt gun. It's a nice, lightweight, pencil barrel, handy carbine that's ridiculously accurate. That's why it's not a truck gun. Because I kind of appreciate it so much, I don't want to beat it up. But that's kind of an aside. An AR is where I would start and look at that. The next one I would go to would be a pistol caliber carbine. And a big reason for this is, let's say, you're slumming it that day and carrying a Glock. I'm just kidding. I got nothing against Glocks. But let's say you carry a Glock day to day. You can carry a couple of 30-round mags in a little pack and a pistol caliber carbine. Whether that's, a Keltec sub 2K or a super high-end Gucci tricked out AR converted to 9mm with a good optic on it. That is still, even though it's a pistol caliber, I would consider it a big step up in firepower and shootability. It takes a lot of dedication and practice to hit targets with a handgun reliably at 50, 75, 100 yards. You can do it if you practice. But, I could take a 12-year-old girl out and in a day fairly confidently have them hitting targets at 100 yards with a pistol caliber carbine. So I'd say it is a step up, and you're going to gain more velocity, more shootability, and generally speaking, more capacity in a pistol caliber carbine. So I'd say look at those. We did a whole show on pistol caliber carbines. If you're interested in that, if you're like, yeah, pistol caliber carbine, that's calling to me. I want that. I want one that fits in a briefcase, fits in a laptop bag. I'm more into the James Bond kind of stuff. Then, maybe a Roni conversion is for you. But go back and listen to that episode. It's very recent on Gunfighter Life about pistol caliber carbines. Did a whole episode on them. But I'd say that'd be the next one to go to. You want a little MP5, beside the front seat of your car or in that back little compartment, that pocket that most cars have. You want an MP5 back there. You want a Roni conversion with a 30-round mag. I'd say rock on. That's a great choice. So pistol caliber carbine, next choice. And the next choice I would have, that I love the shotgun if you listen for any amount of time. It's the weapon I practice with the least. It's probably the least cool gun, but it is the most practical gun. For in-range, close-up combat, the shotgun is unrivaled in its lethality. Yes, you're going to give up some range and some capacity, but its close range capabilities are unrivaled. If you're in an urban environment, or if you're only going to have one long gun in your car, then you want to be able to handle any contingency. You heard my background, and I've said this before. And I didn't come up with this. I got it from a very old episode of the Survival Podcast. But I can count the number of gunfights I've been in on both hands and have fingers left over. And you've heard my bio. Been to war twice for this country. Served on some of the nastiest streets in LAPD. Served as the commander of an active shooter response team. Still, I could count all the number of gunfights I've been in and have fingers left over. I can't recall the amount of times in my life I've had to eat. Putting food on the table, the shotgun is unrivaled. The shotgun will take anything from a dove or a chipmunk to a brown bear in Alaska. In fact, it is a go-to brown bear gun in Alaska, 12 gauge with slugs. And you talk about giving up range, but if you get a good accurate shotgun, and I'm not even talking about a specialty slug gun, I'm talking about a good smooth bore all-around shotgun with slugs that it likes, you're talking a 150-yard gun. And you got to ask yourself, if you're talking about an all-around gun in a defensive scenario, 150 yards is probably going to handle just about everything. Unless, your primary thing you have a truck gun for is dispatching coyotes, which sometimes can have a pretty far shot. But if you're talking about a good all-around gun, a shotgun is a fine truck gun. A Maverick 88 you can get for $200, or a nice Mossberg 590, or a Remington 870 with an assortment of birdshot and keep it loaded with number 4 double-aught buck and some slugs on the side saddle. That's a formidable weapon. It's what a lot of cops have in the center of their car. That's their truck gun. When I was a cop riding around the streets of LA, what was beside me? Remington 870 with buckshot and slugs. There's plenty of times as a cop I had access to Ar-15s, even in full auto, or Mini 14, or a shotgun. And I grabbed the shotgun because it was the best tool for the job. And I would say they're a fine choice for a truck gun. My favorite all-around shotgun is no secret if you've listened for some amount of time. It's a Benelli M2. I really like that gun. But a good, reliable semi-auto shotgun or a good, reliable, even cheap pump shotgun would be a fine choice. And it's a fine all-around weapon. And that doesn't change when you throw it in the back of your trunk of your car or behind the seat of your truck. Now, I probably should have thrown this in right after the AR, but the AK. AKs are built like a tank. They're a hard-use piece of military machinery. Now, we've had a lot of different AKs come into the market in the past several decades. Some of them are awesome war machines, and some of them are cheap pieces of junk. Just because it looks like an AK doesn't mean it's going to be a good, reliable gun for you, and doesn't mean it's going to be a good truck gun. But if you get a good, reliable AK, they would rival the AR neck and neck for a truck gun. They are the most prolific small arm in warfare around the world, and they would serve well as a truck gun. Again, with the caveat that you actually get like a military spec, reliable, good trunnions, good receiver, Russian, Polish, a good made AK. I gotta be honest, I like that round better for most things than I like the 223. The 7.62x39 is a fantastic, fantastic gun. The AK is a fine weapon, with the caveat, if you're talking mostly about urban warfare, urban combat, you kind of give up a little bit as far as hunting. The round is fine for it, but the rifle doesn't lend itself well to it. And here's the big drawback for that I see, and I really like the AK. In fact, I had a really nice Galil that I got rid of let's just say I got rid of it. And I didn't want an AK for me or my guys when we were doing the active shooter response team. Because what's kind of the quintessential bad guy gun that you think of? It's the AK, and that's kind of ridiculous, but you can't argue with it as a reality. And if you are in an active shooter scenario and you pull out an AK, there's a high likelihood people are going to mistake you for the active shooter. That could happen with an AR or anything else, but I think there is, in reality, a bias against the AK in America. I don't think that's right, and I don't agree with it, but it is. And not liking it's not going to change it. That being said, and with that caveat, I would put it just behind the AR, but a fantastic choice and a fantastic weapon, I rocked one in Iraq. I liked it. I had a catastrophic failure with my M16 in Iraq. I never had a single problem with an AK in Iraq. They're a fantastic weapon, a prolific war machine, and they'd serve fine as a truck gun. Modern truck guns and some of the best choices we laid out the argument that the AR-15, the pistol caliber carbine, the shotgun, and the AK-47. So how do we optimize these as truck guns? Some might argue that you don't need to optimize anything. That, let's say, your semi-automatic M4 clone with just iron sights is fine. And I would say that's a valid argument. It's certainly a step up in firepower and range over, let's say you're carrying a Glock 19. It's certainly a step up from that. Doesn't mean we can't optimize it. I'm talking as a man who loves iron sights, but optics do offer a distinct advantage. So I think the best for a truck gun is going to be a good, robust red dot sight. I'm talking red dot sight you can drop, you can bang around, it doesn't lose zero. Good red dot sight. The ability to acquire targets in low light or no light. So I'm going to submit there's really two best options for this unless there's something I don't know about. The Holosun, one of the models that has a solar power backup, that has solar power. Or the Trigicons that run off tritium and fiber optic. I don't care how long it says the batteries are supposed to last, 50,000 hours, 5 years, 15 years. That's under optimal conditions on a low setting. That's not if it gets 120 degrees in your car and your batteries explode. Or it gets super cold. You can get so cold that the batteries literally won't emit. They won't transfer electricity. Or at least not well enough to work the optic. And let's face it, in a truck gun, we shouldn't, but we might set it back there and forget to check it for a couple of months, and the batteries might literally explode from the heat. So I'd say, if you're going to optimize that AR-15, a good red dot sight, if it is going to be battery powered and only battery powered, I would really recommend co-witnessing with iron sights. And even if you have a good model that's robust and not solely reliant on batteries, I would still recommend backup iron sights. Because, it's a truck gun. You throw something on top of it, it falls out of your truck, whatever happens, you go to Sam's Club or whatever and throw a case of soda on it by accident and the optic comes loose, you still have backup irons. I would say if you're not going to put a red dot on it, and even if you are, a white light is a good addition. Having a good white light. Again, low light or no light, being able to acquire and identify targets. See if you're going to optimize the AR-15. Now, I kind of stumbled upon a great truck gun. Back before the world of COVID, before it really affected us, back when I could get a case of 9mm of 1,000 rounds of really good Spear Lawman for $189. I already had a lower, and I'm not counting the Holosun optic, but I got a complete everything else from Palmetto State Armory nitrided AR pistol for, I want to say, $200 and something or $300 and something. It was so cheap I didn't even worry about it. But $200 and something or $300 and something. And I was like, you know what? Instead of beating up my really nice AR, I'm going to get this dirt cheap AR and I'm going to run it and train with it. If it has malfunctions, that's, just part of the training. Well, this Palmetto State Armory nitrided AR pistol has proven to be one of the most reliable ARs I've ever run. More reliable than the ones I ran in the military as a private contractor. The finish on it is amazing. It's super reliable. They say that you get a shorter barrel, it tends to be less reliable, but I have not found that. This gun is accurate, it's reliable, it's anywhere from the humidity and wetness of Tennessee as a truck gun or a quad gun, as a professional hunter and guide, taking out coyotes to riding around the desert, do all manner of things. I've not seen a spot of rust on it. I've not seen any deterioration. Whatever nitride coating they use on it is super slick and very impervious. the hollow sun I mounted on it, again, I was like, I'm going to get a good optic that's fairly affordable, that doesn't rely solely on batteries, because I've learned the hard way not to trust batteries. And I have dropped that thing. I've taken it to kids' classes and let kids run it. It's been banged around. It hasn't lost zero. It's a fantastic optic. The red dot's never gone out in it. So I stumbled upon that, and it's one of the places I think an AR pistol really shines is as a truck gun, because it's easier to use in confined spaces. You don't know what the future holds. You may have to engage from inside your vehicle. You may have to maneuver in and out of your vehicle. You may have to pass it to somebody else in your vehicle if you're trying to get out of a city in a rough situation. For all those things, an AR pistol, although you do give up some velocity, you gain a lot in maneuverability, and I think that's a better trade-off in a truck gun than it is in most other situations. I'm not a big fan of green tip. It's not very accurate ammo. It's not very terminally effective ammo, but I think this is a place where it wouldn't be my primary ammo, but it would be a great thing to have, and I often have in my case backup mag of green tip. Because again, you're in a vehicle, it's very likely that you would have to engage a target that is hiding behind or in a vehicle. So having a magazine of green tip available is one of the few things I think green tip is useful for. So that's pretty much it, an AR pistol, and obviously a sling. I mean, that kind of goes without saying, but I'll say it, a good quality sling, and by quality I mean mine is a piece of 550 cord. It's literally there so that if I have to use both hands, I can sling it in front or in back. But I'd say there you go on optimizing the AR as a truck gun. Now let's talk about the pistol caliber carbine, and that can mean a lot of things. That can mean anything from a high point carbine, which is not a bad gun for the money. Tend to be super reliable, straight blowback. It could be anything from a pistol caliber carbine high point to a super Gucci-fied PCC gun for USPSA, an AR build, to an MP5. So this is a big, broad spectrum. This is one of the places where I say if you can have ammo commonality, it's not a bad idea. It wouldn't be my first criteria, but let's say you carry, again, a Glock, because it's the most common in America. Let's say you carry a Glock 17 day-to-day, or a Glock 19. You can just have a couple of spare 33-round factory Glock mags in your go bag, in your PCC bag. If it's in a laptop bag, that'd be a good thing. Now, there's not really available armor-piercing or semi-armor-piercing 9mm ammo, but this is we're one of the very few places where I'd say having a mag loaded up with 147 grain or 124 grain NATO FMJs. Again, it wouldn't be my primary ammo, but there may come a time where you have to shoot through a car door, and 9mm ball is going to be good at that. If you're using hollow points, this is one of the places where paying the extra money and getting a good bonded hollow point really might pay off. You're shooting through windshield glass, whether that's shooting through your own windshield out, which is a real thing that happens, or shooting into someone else's car for whatever reason that might be. Again, optimizing it for that. Having a magazine of FMJ, though, generally penetrates a lot, which is one of the reasons it's not good for defense, but one of the few reasons it might be good to have on you in this situation. Again, having one of those 33-round mags loaded up with NATO 124 grain plus P NATO rounds would be not a bad idea. We're talking PCC here. Again, a red dot is an obvious choice. A red dot, again, just like the AR, a red dot. And I really like the ones that don't require batteries. But if you're going to get a battery-operated one, that's fine. I would say, again, backup iron sights or co-witness iron sights, even better. One of the cool things about PCCs, unlike ARs, there's really only a few options for folding stocks on ARs. I don't know that I like any of them, but generally a PCC, a lot of them are made with AR style stocks, or even if they're not, like a SIG MPX, they don't require that buffer tube, which is why you can't generally fold a stock on an AR like you can as easily on an AK. So if you got a PCC, much easier to put a folding stock on there. If we're talking a truck gun or talking a laptop bag gun, something that can be made smaller, I would really recommend getting a folding stock on your PCC if it's a truck gun. It's going to save space. Unlike an AR, you can probably fire it with the stock folded. You may not have time to unfold that stock, but not a big deal if you have a red dot and you know how to use it. It's still a big step up in firepower. And obviously, if you have the time, unfold the stock. But that's a cool thing about the PCC over the AR is they can be made much smaller. And even if they have a folding stock, a lot of times they can be fired with the stock folded. So I would say optimizing the PCC for a truck gun, folding stock if you can get it. Now we talked about slings on the AR. I don't generally like one-point slings, but I think on a PCC that is the best place and the best use of a one-point sling. They're super handy, they're super light. You can literally throw it around your neck and spin it around, one arm or the other arm. Generally, you can make them as heavy as you want, but generally PCCs are super light and super handy. It's one of the benefits of them. So a good single-point sling with a good quick detach, most modern platforms make that easy to accomplish. Again, they're not very heavy, and a single-point sling, especially for a truck gun, you're probably not going to be using the sling and carrying it like that for 12 hours. So a good handy single-point sling with a quick detach if you're optimizing the PCC for a truck gun. Let's talk about one of my personal favorites. I talked about the AR pistol as a truck gun, and I do keep that generally behind the seat of my Hummer as my go-to truck gun. But I have two, and I generally carry a shotgun. Now, I love the shotgun. It would be my secondary go-to as a truck gun. It generally rides also behind the front seat of the Hummer or on the passenger rear side door. But how might I optimize this? Now, you know that I'm a big fan, if you've been listening for a while, of number 4 buck. I really like number 4 buck for home defense. I really like number 4 buck for taking out animals up to and including bear. I really like number 4 buck for a lot of things. I think for most things it's better than double up buck. But I think for this application, the go-to that will be loaded in my shotgun would be double up buck, or even better, triple up buck. The problem is triple up buck is a lot less common than double up buck. There's a lot more varying loads and good loads of double up buck. And the reason I would go to double up buck here as opposed to number 4 buck for this application, at least for the rounds in the tube, is that they're heavier, they have more mass, they carry more energy, they're going to penetrate better. Again, we're talking about you may have to be shooting into a car, out of your windshield, and that double up buck may give you an advantage in that scenario. Again, nobody knows what the future holds. But I would have the tube, if I was optimizing it, I have the tube loaded with double up buck. I would have a side saddle with slugs, and I would know how to quickly interchange the round that I was firing, whether that's running dry or just switching a load. I was practicing that today, actually. Switching one load for another. Be able to throw a slug in there, because it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility where you had to take a much longer shot or a more precise shot. Let's say a shot at somebody holding somebody else hostage in another car. Slug's a better tool for the job than buckshot. And you may want more penetration, and if you're talking about stopping another vehicle, stopping an engine, a slug is a fine thing for that. You're probably not carrying around, a 50 BMG as a truck gun. But a shotgun slug has quite a bit of penetration. You can make deep penetrating slugs or a Bernanke slug. But just your old, 1 ounce Foster slug, a big hunk of penetrating lead that will do well to stop an engine. Which again, we don't know what we're going to be doing, so that comes in handy. And then the reason that even though I have an AR pistol, that I have the shotgun and the car as well, I have some backup loads that have some number 4 shots, some number 6 shot, some number 7.5 shot. In case something happens and, the Russians and the Cubans start paratrooping out of the sky, and I start seeing Patrick Swayze running around in tight jeans. I'm only half joking there. Probably won't be Cubans this time. But, if I have to go out into the woods or go out and feed myself, that's the great thing about the shotgun. In that scenario, I'm going to grab the shotgun over the AR. I have a menagerie of things to hunt with. I can take anything from a dove to a deer to an elk to being able to defend myself or go into an urban environment and do CQB. If you wanted an extended mag tube on your truck gun for a shotgun, I'd say have at it. I'd say the 5 rounds that is on most pump action and semi-autos is probably fine. If you can't solve the problem with 5 rounds of double up buck or 5 slugs, don't know that you're going to solve it with 7 or 8. I would stay away from mag-fed shotguns for this. We're not talking about 3-gun. We're not talking about John Wick. We're talking about rural defensive scenarios. And the tube-fed pump or semi-auto shotgun been hammered out for over 100 years on reliability. Shotgun rounds have rims, and generally rims don't feed as well out of a mag-feed shotgun. I know some mag-feed shotguns probably feed fine, but they're probably in general less reliable than a tube-feed 870, Mossberg 590, Benelli M series. And the great thing about the shotgun, they're kind of inherently meant to be shot fast. So the rib that's on it with the bead or a nice fiber optic front sight, that's probably fine for most things. This is your primary go-to, not your backup, but your go-to all the time shotgun, which I think is a fine choice for a truck gun. Again, a white light, a way to engage and positively identify targets at night or in low light. I have that on my home defense shotgun, but again, it's not my grab and go first choice, it's my second choice for a truck gun, and generally both are in my truck. But I would definitely have a shotgun with a 5-round capacity or better, and I would have a good side saddle with slugs. Those would be probably the only 2 real criteria I would want for a good truck gun, for a shotgun. I love the 410, probably would be my first choice for this. Obviously, 12 gauge because it's so ubiquitous. And this is a time where I think more power is better. Don't know which one of those pellets is going to hit the target. And more in this situation is better. I think 20 gauge would be a fine choice too, but 12 gauge in this scenario I think wins. Now I saved the AK for last because the AK, just your standard, military wood furniture AK with a 30-round mag. Your truck gun, your trunk gun, just put it in there. That's really not much else to be said. The only kind of disadvantage of that is they're hard to mount sights on. They're hard to mount flashlights on. If you can find a way to mount either a white light, a good white light, or a good red dot on there, I wouldn't turn my nose up at that. But I wouldn't sacrifice the good combat iron sights that are so robust and sturdy for a crappy red dot sight. I would rather have the iron sights that are on there. That's one of the good things about the AK. You could throw it in a dirty trunk and have it rattle around, and I wouldn't worry about it losing 0, assuming you zeroed it in the first place. The great thing about the AK, that round, the 7.62 by 39, is an awesome round, and it's awesome for barrier penetration. It's a good round. It's one of the few times where I think just the regular military ball ammunition might be one of your best choices, because 7.62 39 ball, people get killed with that around the world every day. It's a good round for that. Not optimal, but if you're talking about a truck gun, shooting out of a vehicle, shooting into another vehicle, possibly, things like that, it's cheap, it's a fine choice. Really just get the AK loaded up and put it in your trunk. Put it in the back of your truck. Now, this was pointed out to me by a listener that I didn't even think of because it doesn't really apply to me, but make sure in your jurisdiction you obey the local laws. Sometimes you can't, conceal a gun or have a loaded long gun in your vehicle, but you can a pistol. So obviously obey your laws, but if you can just have a loaded gun, long gun in your trunk or behind your seat, there you go. Or some places you have to read very carefully, because in some places loaded, you can have a magazine in and no round in the chamber, and it's still unloaded. It doesn't take very long to rack an AK. You can probably do it while you're getting it out of your trunk and not lose any time. It doesn't take very long to pump a shotgun. Again, you can probably do it while you're getting it out of your vehicle, while you're retrieving it. I got some good feedback from one of the patrons. If you want to be a patron or check out some of the stuff on Patreon, again, goodshepherdtraining.com. speaking of that, and the person that pointed that out to me, that patron sent a message. He wanted to remain anonymous for this, but here's what he says. I enjoyed the truck gun topic. My truck gun is a Galil Ace pistol, 8.3-inch barrel, a rugged micro 30 suppressor, and a small red dot. It fits in a normal backpack, so it is a great grab-and-go package. Folded length is short enough that it doesn't stick out. Don't share my name on that one. One thing that is cool about this is that many states, mine included, allows for a concealed handgun carry, but not a rifle. A pistol with a brace qualifies where a carbine would not. The new regs from BATF might force a change on that, but for now, it is a good thing. And I will second that. I really like the Galil Ace. The Galil Ace is awesome. It is my go-to AK. I don't own one anymore. One of the guns I sold, I kind of wish that I hadn't. I've said many times, and I'll say again, I'm not a gun collector. I'm a gun fighter. And I have so many decades of experience in training on the AR, even though you could make a very valid argument that mechanically the AK is a better weapon. I have decades of training and experience on an AR. But for a while, the Galil Ace was also my go-to truck gun, and it was a great gun. The Galil Ace is my favorite modern-made AK-47. If you want nostalgia, if you want history, the new Galil Ace is not your thing. If you want a functional, rugged, reliable, awesome, well-built AK, the Galil Ace, whether it's the pistol or the regular version, they make them in 223, they make them in 7.62-39, they make them even in 308. The Galil Ace would be a phenomenal choice. It is a phenomenal gun. It is a very well-built AK. It is a modern AK. It's one that doesn't suffer the normal problems of being hard to mount optics and mount lights on, like we talked about. But this patron really knows his stuff, and that is a fantastic choice. The Galil Ace is a fantastic weapon. With that, men, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Gunfighter Life, got you thinking on how to optimize your truck gun. That being said, the most important part of a truck gun, just like the most important part of CCW, concealed carry, is not having the most newest whiz-bang thing. It's actually carrying it. The Smith & Wesson J-frame you have on you is better than the tricked-out 1911 that you left at home. Whatever you have, if it's a long gun, it gives you an increase in firepower. Have it in your vehicle where it's ready. You know, if all you have is an extra 20-gauge pump-use shotgun, load it up with buckshot and put it in your car if it's legal, where you can grab it handily. That's still a massive increase in firepower over, let's say, a Glock 19. If all you have is your grandfather's 30-30 and it's not deer season, you're not hunting with, or even if it is, I guess, instead of leaving it in a gun cabinet at home, keep it well oiled and keep it perhaps in an easy deployable soft case so you don't ruin it if it's your grandfather's 30-30, but have that somewhere handy in your vehicle, assuming it's not your home defense gun. I mean, you have, let's say a shotgun for your home defense gun, and that 30-30 is just laying around in a gun cabinet. You get stuck, somewhere, you're out on a trip and you need that weapon. That 30-30 is a much better option than nothing. With that, the tactical tip of the day. I've been very blessed, if you heard my bio, to do some pretty cool training, as you can imagine. I've done quite a bit of shooting through cars, things like that, shooting at cars with regular small arms, with machine guns. If you don't know about the pillars in a car, they're generally in the tactical community referred to as like A pillar, B pillar. But where the doors come together, or where the front door and back door come together in most trucks, most cars, that's meant to sustain a rollover, which means it's pretty thick steel, which means that even most full-powered machine gun cartridges, your 7.62s, things like that, the pretty robust cartridges aren't going to pass through that. If you have to take cover in a vehicle, unless it's your vehicle and you know exactly where like the engine block and stuff is, if it's a different vehicle, engine space and engine size and block size can vary dramatically and where they are and how much room they take up. Look at some old cars where they have a giant front end for the engine and the engine takes up a very small space in there. Not a great place to take cover. The best place to take cover consistently throughout all vehicle makes and models is that pillar. It's easily identifiable. It runs generally where the front and back doors come together, right behind the driver's seat, right where the seat belt connects. That is generally your best option for cover in most situations. Again, unless you specifically know otherwise, but your police car and you have ballistic doors like we did in LAPD, like that's an exception. For most cars, that pillar that runs down right behind your head where the seatbelt is, separating the front seats from the back seats, that's meant to sustain a rollover. It's going to be pretty robust steel and a good choice for cover. And hopefully you never have to use that tactical tip, but if you do, it's there. With that, the tactical verse of the day. We're talking about truck guns, which kind of implies traveling. This one is a blessing from Deuteronomy 28, one of the verses by God's grace I get to read every morning. And one of the very small verses in all of Deuteronomy 28 is, "Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country." Remember, if you're a Christian, wherever you go, whether it's the city or the country, God is with you and you are a blessed, holy man, set apart. With that, thanks for listening to Gunfighter Life, Part 2 of Truck Guns. I hope you enjoyed this episode. So I think this is a good one for your guys' feedback. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. But let me know your truck guns. Let me know if you want me to share that on the air on a future episode. But what are you carrying behind the seat of your car, in the trunk of your Honda Civic, in your laptop bag? Let the audience know. We're a tribe here. We're a community. Let's help each other out. What do you think is the quintessential or best truck gun? Again, that's goodshepherdtraining.com. One-stop shop for more. Again, share what you're carrying in the truck. Or again, leave a comment. Comment on the podcast. Usually you can scroll down, leave some stars, and it has a thing for a comment. Say, "Great episode. My favorite truck gun is X." And then, people that listen on Spreaker or iTunes or Google, they can all see what your truck gun is. And you can use an anonymous name or whatever. Don't put out your plate number. But hey, I like to rock a Mossberg 500 with slugs. Or, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. A Ruger 1022 with a drum mag is the ultimate truck gun. What do you say? Whatever you want. Anyway, with that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this kind of fun chat. There's a lot of not fun stuff going on in the world right now, but I hope you enjoyed this thought experiment into the truck gun. We live in a far different world than we used to. And if cowboys could see the value of, let's call it a truck gun before they were trucks, surely today we can see the value of a truck gun. So man up. All those cool guns in your safe aren't going to do you any good if you get in trouble and you need them. A gun on your hip and a gun close by, some upgraded firepower in your vehicle. Alright guys, I'm going to throw in a tactical tip. You're probably waiting for something super awesome tactical about truck guns, but I'm not going to give you that. Tactical tip of the day for us men. Safety razors. We talked in the beginning about nostalgia. Sometimes the old ways are better. And I think that safety razors are awesome. I switched to them several years ago. Even my wife switched to them now. But it's just the old school razor you think about in World War I or World War II. It's just a straight razor blade that you screw into a handle. Anyway, one single sharp razor blade screwed into a reusable handle. The Mach 3, the Mach 4, the Mark 12, whatever crazy amount of shark tooth blades you think you need, you really only need one sharp blade. Unless you just hate money. But I just looked it up on eBay. There's 100 Gillette Platinum double-edged razor blades for $12.99. Little tip on those, the safety razor blades, you can use the one side and then flip the blade over so you actually get like 4 cutting surfaces on them. You only need one at a time, but they last quite a while. Again, the safety razor blade's kind of the quintessential, World War I, World War II, American man shaving system. You don't need some kind of fancy new space age razor. You need one sharp blade to cut hair. So that's tactical tip of the day. Old school safety razor. Which brings us to the tactical verse of the day. Remember to keep God first. Because it doesn't matter how many gunfights you win or lose. Doesn't mean anything if you don't have eternal salvation. Why do we need truck guns and to be ready? Why is being ready important? Luke chapter 17. In that day, he who was on the housetop and his goods are in the house, let him not come down to take them away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Nobody knows what the future holds. Every time I've ever needed a gun, I've needed it right now. Stand ready, be ready. Hello, gunfighters, well-armed citizens, members of a well-regulated militia. Appreciate you tuning in to Gunfighter Life, where we talk about gunfighting the right way, Judeo-Christian values with God at the center where he belongs, and real-world, first-hand experience. If you're listening to this and you want more, all I'll say is your one-stop shop is goodshepherdtraining.com. Today is part 2 of a fun subject, truck guns. We talked about that and kind of how we got to where we are with truck guns and the best truck guns of today, what a truck gun is. This episode is going to be more on fine-tuning or optimizing your truck gun. With that, we'll plug in the bio. If you want to skip it, skip around 3 minutes and 45 seconds from where it starts.